Labour's financial plans are in deep trouble, and Chancellor Rachel Reeves may be forced to unleash a £25 billion tax hike to plug the enormous black hole in public finances. As she prepares for her first budget, the consequences of this shortfall could hit ordinary taxpayers hard. Brace yourselves, because Reeves has a tough road ahead, and your bank account might just be caught in the crossfire. Chancellor Rachel Reeves is facing a monumental challenge. According to a report from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, IFS, Reeves might have to implement up to £25 billion in tax increases to fund Labour's ambitious spending plans. This is not just an ordinary budgetary gap, it's a looming crisis that threatens to derail the very foundation of Labour's economic promises. As Labour's Chancellor, Reeves has pledged to increase investment in key areas like public services while dealing with a government deficit left by her predecessors. But with public debt soaring and taxes already at historic highs, this won't be an easy task. The IFS's Green Budget report, funded by the Nuffield Foundation and relying on economic forecasts from Citi, delivers a grim picture of the situation. It highlights that to meet Labour's spending goals, Reeves will have to find ways to raise substantial funds, without breaking Labour's commitment to avoid raising income tax, corporation tax, national insurance or VAT. This leaves her with few options to raise the necessary revenue, sparking concern among economists and political commentators alike. The head of the IFS, Paul Johnson, issued a stark warning, calling Reeves's upcoming budget the most consequential since at least 2010. This is no exaggeration. The last time the UK saw a tax increase of this magnitude was during the economic crises of July 1997 and October 2010, when governments implemented tax hikes of around £13 to £14 billion each. But now, Reeves is facing a potential £25 billion fiscal hole, which could make these earlier increases seem small by comparison. To avoid making deep cuts to public services, Reeves must find at least £16 billion through tax rises to balance the books by 2028 to 29, according to the IFS. This is on top of the £9 billion already outlined in Labour's manifesto, bringing the total needed to a staggering £25 billion. The big question on everyone's mind is, where will this money come from? Reeves has so far rejected the idea of raising major taxes like income tax, national insurance and VAT. However, this promise has backed her into a corner. With key revenue streams off limits, she'll need to explore other, potentially unpopular, avenues. Speculation is rife that she could target capital gains tax, which applies to profits made from investments like stocks and property. The IFS has recommended reforms to this tax, although its director Paul Johnson has stressed that careful thought is needed to avoid unintended consequences. Another potential option on the table is changes to inheritance tax. The UK's inheritance tax system has long been a political hot potato, with some arguing it disproportionately affects middle-income families. While increasing inheritance tax could help generate revenue, it's also likely to be deeply unpopular with voters, particularly among Labour's core supporters. Meanwhile, the pressure to fund public services is mounting. The IFS estimates that to meet the government's commitments, Reeves will need to allocate an additional £30 billion for day-to-day spending by 2028 to 2029. The situation has been exacerbated by the challenges Labour claims to have inherited, including a £22 billion black hole left by the previous Conservative government. Reeves has warned that tough decisions lie ahead, but she remains adamant that she will not reintroduce austerity measures like those seen under previous administrations. However, avoiding cuts while also raising the necessary revenue could prove to be an almost impossible balancing act. The IFS report goes further, noting that public services like prisons, police forces and local councils are particularly vulnerable to cuts if new revenue streams can't be found. Labour will need to make some hard choices about where to direct funding and how to raise the necessary resources without breaking its manifesto promises. Adding to the complexity, Benjamin Nabarro, chief UK economist at Citi, has pointed out that the UK's economic situation is even more constrained than those of many other advanced economies. He noted that the UK is facing both a budget deficit and a current account deficit, meaning that borrowing more to plug the gap could be risky. The temptation to increase borrowing might be strong, but the long-term consequences could be damaging. Nabarro does see potential for structural reforms that could help the economy, but such changes will take time and may not deliver immediate results. As Reeves works to finalise her budget, speculation abounds about what steps she might take. Could Labour end up walking back on its promise not to raise key taxes? Or will Reeves find alternative ways to generate revenue without alienating voters? One thing is certain. Her decisions in the coming weeks will have profound consequences for the UK economy and for Labour's political future. But this tax bombshell isn't the only controversy facing Labour right now. In another heated debate, private school head teachers are gearing up for a legal fight against Labour's plans to impose VAT on school fees. 3 Christian schools, Emmanuel School in Derby, the Branch Christian School in Yorkshire, and the King's School in Hampshire, are threatening to take legal action, arguing that the policy could violate human rights laws by restricting parents' ability to choose their children's education. Caroline Santa, head teacher of the King's School, has been particularly vocal in her opposition, citing the European Convention on Human Rights, which guarantees the right to education and respects parents' religious beliefs. Santa argues that by imposing VAT on private school fees, Labour is undermining parents' ability to choose a religious-based education for their children. The King's School, which already operates on tight margins, fears that the new policy could drive them out of business, as the added tax burden would be passed on to parents, many of whom are already struggling to afford fees. Santa has criticised the timing of the VAT proposal, calling it unnecessarily hasty. Implementing the tax in January, when families are already feeling financial pressure after the holiday season, could be devastating. For many parents, the additional costs could be the final straw, forcing them to withdraw their children from the school altogether. This legal battle could become a major political headache for Labour, as it highlights the tension between its tax policies and the rights of religious institutions. If that wasn't enough, Labour is also facing a growing backlash over its decision to pause the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act. The legislation, introduced by the previous Conservative government, was designed to protect free speech in universities, but Labour decided to halt its implementation, citing concerns about student welfare. The decision has provoked outrage, particularly after former Home Secretary Suella Braverman had a speaking event at Cambridge University cancelled due to safety concerns related to pro-Palestinian protests. Conservative MPs have slammed Labour for what they see as an attack on free speech, with Damien Hinds accusing the government of making a chilling decision. The delay in the legislation, they argue, is creating an environment where speakers like Braverman are being silenced by student activists. Former Conservative Minister Richard Holden has also weighed in, claiming that Braverman's cancellation would not have occurred if the Freedom of Speech Act had been in place. Labour, however, is standing by its decision, with Education Minister Catherine McKinnell defending the move as necessary to avoid placing a disproportionate burden on universities. She emphasised that Labour is committed to protecting free speech, but wants to ensure the legislation is implemented in a way that balances the interests of all parties. As these controversies unfold, it's clear that Rachel Reeves and the Labour Party are facing a series of major tests. The decisions they make now, whether about taxes, education, or free speech, will shape the future of British politics for years to come. And for many voters, the stakes couldn't be higher.